The name Alan Enthoven arouses strong emotions in those of us old enough to remember Mrs. Thatcher's attempts at introducing the market to healthcare. Because Enthoven was considered to be, rightly or wrongly, I'm not sure, one of the most influential people in helping Mrs. Thatcher come up with the idea of market forces in healthcare. Enthoven has written a lot in America, and his writing in America is very much in favour of a national health service and universal coverage. Perhaps his most famous but least well-known book is apparently nothing to do with healthcare at all. It's a book whose subtitle is Shaping the Defence Programme, 1961 to 69. How Much is Enough is the title. It's written by Enthoven and Wayne Smith, and describes the work they did with Robert S. McNamara in the 1960s in the Pentagon. Now, those people old enough to remember Mrs. Thatcher will probably also remember Robert McNamara. McNamara moved from the Ford Motor Corporation to the Defence Department. He was one of the whiz kids, one of the team in the Second World War who introduced systems approaches to engineering and the production of warships and aeroplanes, which led to a dramatic increase in production. He was then recruited to turn Ford around, which he certainly helped Ford survive, but whether he turned it around is another question. Very well dealt with in a book called The Reckoning by David Halberstam. David Halberstam, the Pulitzer Prize winner who sadly died in a car crash last year, also gave wonderful insights into the way the Pentagon worked in his book called The Best and the Brightest, where McNamara is one of the central figures. The Best and the Brightest is about the Kennedy years. So, Enthoven comes from this highly rational school and was brought in by Robert McNamara to help him deal with the defence budget. What McNamara found was each service arguing for more investment. There were no limits to the number of aircraft carriers or soldiers or airplanes or nuclear weapons. Each service competed with the other. He introduced the concept of program budgeting. So instead of simply saying, do we need more battleships, he would ask, are the battleships part of the war prevention program, or the defence program, or the attack program? And they grouped the services into programs, and they brought in people like Enthoven and other bright young people from RAND and from universities who the generals hated. This describes Enthoven's work and the work of the whole team that was brought in to create program budgeting. When considered on its own, there is no limit that could be spent on education or on health or on defence. But some limit has to be set. How much is enough is the question. And that, of course, begs the question, what do we mean by enough? There are certain principles emerge which are very relevant to anyone managing a budget. They're particularly relevant to commissioners, and it might be thought that this book is really only for commissioners, but the rise of program budgeting in the National Health Service and in other health services indicates the need for everyone to consider program budgeting. If you put program budgeting and DH into Google, you'll see what's been done in the Department of Health to introduce program budgeting, and it's excellent work. We now know, for example, that we spend about £3 billion a year on treating gastrointestinal disease. We know that we spend $847 million treating asthma. How much is enough? These decisions, of course, were never explicitly made. We've just arrived there. And that was the position that Alan Enthoven found when he went into the Pentagon. What advice is there from Enthoven that we should bear in mind? There are a few simple rules. Firstly, when you're talking about effects, always talk about costs. Probably easier in defence than in health, but Every time we talk about cost and effect, we talk about them together. Secondly, never let single decisions hit you. Always be comparing different decisions. So if people are arguing they want to invest more in defending the nation, does that come at the expense of the force we have available for attacking other people? If we want to spend more on musculoskeletal disease, does that have to come at the expense of, and how does it compare with bids for, spending on cancer or mental health or some other health problem? So, how much is enough? That's the question. There are, of course, some people who believe that you could spend anything you want on healthcare. It doesn't matter if we spend 20% of the GNP in healthcare. And of course, America looks as though it is heading that way. But most people, most economists would say that is not the way to go. And most people would say that's not the way to go. Because if you spend 20% of the GNP in health, you're going to have to take the money from somewhere else. How much is enough? Alan Enthoven and Wayne Smith.